We are finally installing the main entry door. We are building the door frame from scratch, which had its challenges, refinishing the solid mahogany vintage door that we found, and adding a special accent panel since it was missing one when we bought it. Use every piece of equipment you have to make this happen. No!
What?
We are making our own custom door frame to fit the vintage door we found and the rough opening on our home. We started off with 2x12x8 pine boards, and I used the planer to get them to the correct thickness. Then I ran them through the table saw to get them to the rough width, and then I used the jointer to get them to the finished width and also to get the edges nice and straight. These wide boards are for the door frame itself, and I'm also making some boards for the door jamb and for the trim around the door. I'm doing all of these boards at once, taking them all through the same process while I'm at it so that it all goes faster. So right now I'm working on jointing some of those trim pieces. Back to the door frame board, I'm working on the header here and I'm cutting in the notches on each side. The boards were a little bit different for each side, so I had to do a different size notch for each side. So I'm just resetting up for the other side. And here's a finished look of all of the framing pieces. We wanted a special door to use as the main entry door for our home. This is the door that you see when you walk up to our home, and so we wanted it to be a special and unique door. And so we were looking around and we found this old, rather beat up, used but solid mahogany door, and it was missing a panel. And so it wasn't very expensive, and we fell in love with the detail and the special characteristics of it. It's just a gorgeous, solid mahogany door, and so we decided to go ahead and get it and figure out what we would do with the missing panel later. Here I'm doing some hand sanding on some of the carved panels. It has two carved panels on it, one upper and one lower. Beautiful carving. I love the design, but it's a lot of hand sanding, very detailed. And it just took me a long time to do, but it wasn't unpleasant work. Just takes a lot of time. You have to do it with several grits, and so I ended up meticulously sanding both of these detailed panels several times with several grits. After taking my finished measurements on the rough frame and doing my calculations for the door height, I determined that this door was a little taller than we needed, and I needed to remove a couple of inches, like 2.5 inches off the bottom side. Fortunately, it's a solid door, and it's not a problem at all to cut off a few inches off of the bottom. It doesn't hurt the structural integrity. It's got huge mortise and tenon fits. This is an 1.75 inch thick solid mahogany door, and my little electric handsaw was having a little bit of trouble getting through it. It turned out just to be that the battery was a little low, so I put a fresh battery in it and it was able to finish the cut. This is an unusually large and very heavy door that we found out originally came from a restaurant in New Mexico. This door is so thick, I just love it. As a woodworker, I really appreciate wood, and this is not a laminate. This is just a solid piece of mahogany. Every part of this door is made from a solid piece of mahogany wood, really thick. It's just a super heavy-duty, heavy construction door, and I love it. This door is gorgeous, but there is a lot of hand sanding that needed to be done. Those big flat surfaces were easy to do with the sander, but as you can see, there's tons of detail that I have to go over meticulously by hand through different grits of sandpaper. So I spent many, actually very pleasant hours working on this in between other projects. I don't mind doing this kind of work at all. I just, put on something interesting to listen to and get out there and kind of get in the groove and start sanding. The time flies by. There were a few damaged spots that needed to be patched. There was one crack that needed to be filled and some old nail holes or something. So anyway, I decided to go ahead and mix up my own filler to try to match the color as closely as possible. I used some of the dust from the sander to actually get the wood in the glue filler itself, and then just some wood glue and another type of filler that I had. So I just mixed it up until it looked about right to me, and now I'm putting it in with a putty knife. Hopefully this will match pretty good. We'll see what it looks like when it dries. Right now it's looking a little light. I do like making my own putty fillers, for whatever piece I'm working on, and using some of the sanding dust from sanding that project. It really helps keep it in the right tone. Even if the shade isn't quite right, at least it's the right tone of wood. And so that's worked out good for me in the past, and that's what I like to do. It's very low cost. It's basically just the cost of the glue. So it's a good way to do it. I'm bringing it inside now. leaning it up against the wall just for the night, and I realized there's some more spots on the back that I'd missed, so going outside, getting a little bit more, and patching up those spots that I saw in the back. You can get a good look at that panel that's missing. We have no idea why this panel was removed. Presumably it had something to do with the restaurant. Maybe they had their own, logo or something in that spot, but the panel is gone, and I got to do something with that spot. So I've put in a good amount of time thinking about what to do there. Back to working on the door frame pieces. Everything is dimensioned now, so all I have to do is sand it down real good and apply the finish. We went back and forth on the finish, trying to decide whether we wanted to go with a painted finish, whether to do the graying, aging thing that we'd done. But in the end, we decided that the blackened finish would look best with the rest of the home, and we think it'll contrast nicely with the mahogany. So after I finished the sanding, I applied the blackening finish to the door frame components here. I'll let that dry, and usually I'm able to start applying the oil finish just within an hour or two. The blackening agent we put on here just takes one application, so it's really easy to apply. Really love the look it imparts to the wood. Next, I'm moving on to the smaller trim pieces and the door jamb pieces. This next part is my absolute favorite part of the entire door restoration. I'm ready to apply the oil. This is the best part of any woodworking project, and with mahogany, it's extra good. Mahogany has one of the biggest transformations of any wood that I've come across. It really comes to life. It has an amazing chatoyance or tiger's eye effect, and so it just shimmers in the light, and it actually has a natural nap too, so that from one direction it'll look light in tone, and from the other direction it'll look dark in tone. It's a beautiful, gorgeous wood with depth for days. I just love it so much, and putting this oil on is so satisfying. It's just gorgeous. When this door was made, they didn't put an oil finish like this on it directly. They put a stain on it first, a mahogany stain, which I always wondered why they did that. And then I realized it's to minimize this nap that you get with different panels looking different from different angles. But I love it just the way it is. It's beautiful. It changes as you move around and look at it from different directions. It's a gorgeous wood. And now moving on to filling in that missing panel. We decided to create a metal panel to replace it, which we're going to mount something special on. The metal that I'm using is a piece that I'd originally bought for that desk leg. I created that pyramidal shaped desk leg out of this years back, and we've been lugging this very heavy piece of metal around for years. Finally found another use for it, so I'm cutting out a chunk to put in the door. I marked the size, and now I'm using a 7-inch cutting disc mounted to an old handsaw to make the cut. This imparts a lot less heat to the metal than, say, using an oxyacetylene torch, and it leaves more the original finish, which I wanted. We looked far and wide for the perfect thing to go on this panel, and we ordered it, and it has finally come in. We wanted to put a lizard on the door. We have lizards out here. They're one of our favorite creatures, and so we started looking for a brass lizard to mount to this metal plate and have as a permanent accent on the door. And so we looked far and wide to find one that was perfect. We couldn't find one that was very big or that was very heavy duty. And so we finally ordered one off of Etsy from an antique shop in England, of all places. And it has finally come in. We're about to unwrap our brass lizard. They wrap this thing really well. And almost done here. Here he is. We love this little guy. It's a beautiful brass lizard. It's solid brass, very heavy. He has kind of a shiny spot on the head where people has rubbed his head. He's an older antique. Anyway, he's going to make a great addition to the home. Well, we love the look of this. Can hardly wait to get it installed. So I'm doing a little test fit on the metal panel. It's not quite fitting, just a hair large. I'm going to have to grind on the edges just a little bit. By the way, we've decided to leave the metal its natural finish with the scale and everything on it. It gives it a nice textured look, black look, and it protects it from rust as well. So we're leaving it that finish, but I'll put some wax or something on it to keep it from rusting. Once that was finished, I went ahead and mounted the lizard to the plate. I used 2 bolts screwed in from the underneath. Just getting ready to install it here, I decided to use silicone to seal it to the door so that it doesn't leak, and it also serves as a glue. I pre-taped the panel so that the silicone won't squeeze out onto the panel itself, and I'm ready to fit it into place. just carefully leaning it in here, trying not to get silicone everywhere, kind of reaching through and supporting it from the back side as I lean it in, and it fits. This looks good. So I just pressed it into place, and now I can move on to attaching it from the back side here. Get a little shot there of how it looks coming through. Now I'm ready to go ahead and attach these trim pieces. These removable trim pieces came with the door. Apparently they were what was originally holding in the panel for the restaurant or whatever. Fortunately, they put them back in before they sold the door, so I had these. These came with the door. I removed them to get this metal panel in, and now I'm putting them back in place. They fit real nice and snug, so I'm just fitting them in carefully. And once those are in and everything's sealed up, this is a good tight fit, but that's what we like. Everything is in, and then I'll secure them with brad nails. Man, my finger does look awfully close to the brad nailer there. We have a lizard on our door. How cool is that? Looks great. The door also came with a wooden pull handle, which I still need to redo here. We just have it set in place to see if we like it, and we do, so I'll be refinishing that. Now I'm installing the base plate for the door. I've already cut it down to the width of the door, and I'm just screwing it in. It has a rubber seal along the bottom that seals against the base plate, and it also has a little lip that sticks out that's a drip edge to help the water drip away from the door. I'm pre-drilling the holes for the mounting screws so they don't crack out this hardwood. And then I decided to go ahead and install the hinges so I can be all ready for the installation tomorrow. These are a heavy-duty ball-bearing hinge that's rated for the weight of these heavy doors and should have real smooth operation.
So Red is going to install the door today. Very exciting. See a squished spider up there. Nice to keep everything out. Be nice to get this replaced, so it's warming up outside, so we'll have the door off for a while. Hopefully this goes well.
Well, we're heading over to the house to install the front door. We have a beautiful day. We're getting a fairly early start. I'm a little stressed because, it needs to be done today. Otherwise, we won't have a front door on the house tonight. So hopefully everything goes well. I've tried to make all the preparations so that we're all ready, and hopefully this will go fairly quick. We go back and forth calling this the front door one day and the back door the next. It's on the back of the house technically because the big windows are on the front. But it really feels like the front door because it's the main entry door. In any case, the front/back door, we're getting ready to put it in. Well, I removed the temporary door and the temporary door jamb and the temporary threshold, and we're just sweeping things out, getting things cleaned up. Here I'm taking off the temporary striker plate, and we're getting ready to put the new door in. Just kind of finishing up this rough opening and getting ready to put the frame on. Well, I'm coming back from the shop. I had to go over and get my little hand circular saw. I'm already having a little bit of trouble. This header plate was a little bit too wide and I'm having to trim it down. I'm just cleaning up the edges here by hand and putting a little chamfer on the edge so that it goes cleanly up into the corner. And then this should be fitting. I believe I did a test fit and it did fit, so I'm getting ready to install it here, just putting some silicone up there to make a good seal to keep the weather out. It was a good snug fit. I used a dead blow hammer to tap it into place, and now I'm brad nailing it in. I'm just putting the brad nails in that little groove on the side where they won't show. See if this is going to fit. I'm sure it won't. It never does. Okay. Fitting. tight. I think it's might. That's good. Hammer. Other things will disappear. It's not possible. It just doesn't happen in the real world. It's close. There's a little trimming on the back side. Ah yes, just needs a little trimming. Let us count the times. This is the first trim. Doing a little hand trimming here, see if I can make this fit. It's close. Pretty close, but still not quite there. And I get some power tool here to help me out a little bit. Second trim. Surely this will work. That's a little closer, but still not quite there. We're on the third trim now. It's still not quite there. Fourth trim. Surely this will get it. Fourth trim. I think we're finally there. Ready to install. April is doing a great job on sealing this up. She likes things to be very well sealed, so she's doing a thorough job. This is a custom door frame, and there's not going to be any gap between the door frame board and the rough opening. I'm attaching the door frame directly to the rough opening 2x4. I have a little problem here. I'm the right size at the top and at the bottom, but in the middle, it's too small. The door frame itself is too small. It's like it's bowed in on one side, and I don't have enough room for the door to fit. Basically, I'm at a half. I'm an 1/8 of an inch shy. Yeah. Maybe about an hour. Right here, this measurement would fit.
Yeah.
I have enough. I need about 3/8. I don't know which one is unlevel. I don't know which one is unflat. Hinge, do a little hand planing in the middle here, and then also do a little hand planing on the door jamb, and that would be enough. All I need is that 1 3/8 thickness. So. Okay, this is looking much better. Well, after careful examination, I discovered that my door frame was a little bowed out in the middle on the hinge side, and that the door was a little bowed out in the middle on the hinge side. Very strange. It wasn't flat along that edge, and I need to plane both of them down flat. But wouldn't you know it, my plane blades are dull. I've been using this thing fairly heavily, and they've been getting dull, or they've been dull for a long time, and I've been avoiding changing these out. But now that I need to do some precision work, it is high time. I can't put it off any longer. I need to replace the blades. Fortunately, I did have a set of sharp replacement blades, but I've never replaced the blades on this planer. It's been a wonderful planer. The blades have lasted great. I've never replaced the blades, and I've used it for a couple of years. So it took a little figuring, but it wasn't too bad. I was able to get them changed out. Now I have fresh, sharp blades, and I'm ready to try to flatten these bowed areas. These electric hand planers are nice, but you can really get yourself in trouble if you're not careful. They will take off a lot of material really fast, and you can very quickly get kind of sideways or make gouges with them. So I'm taking my time and being really careful here. I don't want to ruin this piece. I ended up taking about 1/8 of an inch off of the center of the bow and then tapering that in until I got a nice flat surface. Of course, I'll have to come back and re-blacken this area. Okay, I think that's kind of respectable. This was a very messy process. We have wood chips everywhere in our nice new house. And now we're planing the edge of this door down. It's very odd that the center was bowed up about 1/8 of an inch. Very unusual that it wasn't flat. I assume somebody must have trimmed it at some point and didn't cut it straight. But in any case, a little work with the planer and we got it flattened back down. Now I've moved on to sanding this place on the door frame that I had planed down so that April can stain that. And after another quick trip to the shop, I've got my router out and I'm rerouting the hinge seat in the door and finishing up the edges of that with a chisel, getting that all cleaned up so I can remount the hinge in the center here. Once that was done, we just needed to re-oil the edge where I had planed it down and we should be ready for another try. So I'm moving on to cutting the threshold to size. This has to be cut to size to precisely fit in between the door frame boards on the side. This die grinder with this 1/32 inch cutting disc works perfect for this. It's such a great tool. It's the perfect tool for the job. Sometimes having the perfect tool just makes such a big difference. Anyway, this is just making this job easy. I know in the past I would have tried to do this with maybe a circular saw with some kind of a cutting disc on it. Anyway, this was really nice and precise, worked great. It's pretty good for me. Very unskilled individual doing this. Basically, it's 1/8 of an inch higher on this side, plus 1/8 of an inch there. I had the sill plate set loosely into place, and I was checking to see how square it was with the rest of the door frame. It's a little bit off. I'll need to make an adjustment, but it's an adjustable height sill plate, so I have some adjustment to play with there, so that'll work out okay. Now I'm making some precise measurements to locate the hinges, the hinge placement, so we can set the door in place and screw in the hinges and actually mount the door. We set the door in place. It's open so I can access the hinges, and it's sitting on some boards to prop it up to the right height. Once we had the height aligned with those markings that I made earlier, I connected the bottom hinge and then put the level on to get the door perfectly level and then connected the top and middle hinge. And we're just stepping back to get our first look here. It's looking great. This is very exciting. And checking the swing. It's all looking okay. We have the clearance now. This is going to work. So I'm putting in the rest of the screws and finishing up the attachment of the hinges. The door is officially mounted, but there is a problem. Use every piece of equipment you have to make this happen. The door was hitting the threshold on the handle side, and I realized at the foundation there's a rough spot that raised up on that side that I needed to grind down. So I went back to the shop for what feels like the 100th time today already to get my big grinder out and my little grinder and a fan to blow the grinding dust out of the house so I could grind down on the foundation here a little bit so I can get this sill plate in more level. Well, that's all sorted. Now I realize that the middle hinge is binding a little bit. When I was planing, it wasn't quite flat and true. It was a little bit sideways. And so anyway, I need to do a little handwork to relieve that middle hinge and redo it. Once that was done, it seems to close well, and I'm back to working on the sill plate. I just needed to do a tiny bit of trimming so that it would sit squarely in the door. I'm getting close, but this sill plate is killing me. I decided to take a break from that and move on to installing the doorknob. The doorknob on this door sits unusually high, and it's because it has that restaurant-style pull handle below it. So it's kind of a funny or interesting, unusual doorknob configuration, but I really like the way it works. With the doorknob installed, I'm ready to move on to the striker plate. So I'm just drilling out a recession for the latching mechanism and chiseling that out to get it nice and square and the right size. I love using hand chisels, so anytime I get an excuse to get out a hand chisel and do some handwork on wood, I'm enjoying it. So it is really nice, especially when you're installing doors, to have a set of chisels, because that's when I use them the most for interior type stuff. They're nice for installing the striker plate and also working with hinges. And closing the door here to do a quick test fit to get the depth just right. Mark that, and now I'm ready to pre-drill the holes and screw this in place. And we will come back in later with some of that blackening agent just with a small paintbrush and do the inside of this hole so it doesn't stand out. It makes it blend in much better. And now the door is closing and latching and looking good. I think we are ready to go ahead. I'm getting back to that sill plate, almost ready for the final install. Did a little test fit and it looks like it's going to work, so I'm ready to glue it in. Just applying a healthy amount of construction adhesive to the back side. I'm putting 2 good strips of that along the inside and the middle. And then I'm going to be using some sealant along the outside edge to seal out the water. I might mention that I decided not to use the sticky black flashing tape that some people would put underneath this, just because I felt like it would adhere better directly to the concrete and I wanted it to be firmly affixed. I also ground a slight taper into the concrete here so it slopes a little bit away from the house so the water all flows out and away. Next up is the doorstop trim, so I'm cutting it to size, and I had to mill in a little notch on the inside of this to hold the tab for the weather stripping. So I'll give you a quick look at it here. It's just a little notch that I milled into this piece that the weather stripping will slip into. Second try on the trim, it's absolutely illegal for it to fit the first time. Next up, I had to cut a piece of weather stripping to length. It just comes in a big old roll and it's really hard to manage. It wants to curl and twist and it's really difficult to get it cut to length. This part is really tricky because you have to hold the weather stripping and the trim up at the same time with the weather stripping in the groove of the trim. And then you have to have someone on the inside. So April's on the inside and I'm going to get this piece up into place and we're going to try to determine the right amount of squish on this weather stripping because the weather stripping needs to be compressed basically, but you don't want it too compressed, and so we have to get it to the perfect amount of compression and then brad nail it into place. So I think we've got it. We've got a couple nails in. I'm just going along and making sure that that tab on the weather stripping is completely seated. It looks good. The door seems to be sealing nicely along the top. Time for the second piece. I have the doorknob side piece cut and just checking the fit here. This is looking all right. The corners are really tricky with this foam. I'm trying to get a little bit of overlap. It needs to fit just right so I don't have a gap up there. Once that is situated, I'm ready to give it just the right amount of compression, that magical amount, and then brad nail it into place. And moving on to the last piece of the doorstop, cutting the foam for that third and final piece. I'm going to have April give me a hand holding this in place. It's tricky to hold everything in place, and the compression on this is really important. I do a little bit less compression on the hinge side because I don't want it to pinch as the door is closing. If you have too much compression, it'll try to pinch. But I think we got it just right, and I'm ready to move back to the sill plate to make the final adjustment on the height. I bought an adjustable sill plate because I knew I might have trouble with the height. It's really tricky getting the height just right, and I'm glad I did. So I'm able to remove these covers and adjust it precisely with the little screws in here. I want about a 1/16 of an inch interference between the top plate of this sill plate and the rubber gasket on the bottom of the door plate. Oops, I should be able to just kind of look at the gap underneath this thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And close the door. I was able to adjust one side up a little bit more than the other side and correct for a little bit of out of level that I had on the footer of the house here. So this worked perfect. I was able to get the perfect amount of contact all the way across and get a good seal. I need to mount the handle.
Is it ready?
It is. I have to find some hardware for it, so I'm going to do the trim first. Well, the door is installed and it's completely sealed on the outside, so I just need to finish up the interior trim. No!
What?
It popped out the bottom. Well, it's been a long day with a lot of difficulties to overcome, but I'm in the home stretch and I still have daylight outside, so we will have a door on the house tonight. So I finished up the interior trim, did a little touch-up, installed the exterior pull handle, and I'm ready to move on to the final step, which is putting a coating of silicone in between the door frame and the metal frame. I taped it all up first, both sides, and then we used black silicone to seal the gap. We quickly removed the tape before the silicone dried, and that finishes up the door installation. This has been quite the day. I feel like I've carried over almost every tool I own to accomplish this task, but it's done and it feels wonderful. It really feels like a monumental task accomplished here. This really puts the cap on the move-in process. It really feels like a finished home now to us. It's great to be living in here and have a door that'll keep the bugs out and keep the rain and wind out. I've really been dreading this. I've never done a front door and had it sealed properly, and I wanted to do this one right. And I feel like this one is sealed good, it swings and closes good. I feel like this worked out right. Nice to be able to keep all these critters out. Thank you for watching and join us again next week.